coming. We really appreciate it. We know that the decisions that USG makes can affect every student on campus, so we're glad that we can have the opportunity to hear what you have to say, answer any of your questions, and hear out some of your concerns. So this slideshow basically goes through each financial change that we suggest, that Comptroller Johnny and I suggest we make in the funding policies, as well as go through some of the other cuts of USG that we need to make in order to be solvent over the next 2 years. So with that, I'll get started and show you some of the proposed changes that I've made for next year. So Rich and I, when going to the Student Fee Advisory Committee, looked at our budget and said, if we continue to spend the same way, that's just even spending, assuming there's no more groups, there's not an increase in the number of groups, there's not an increase in the number of funding requests or the total amount requested, what will happen over the next 2 years? And we found that if we spend at the same level we're spending right now, in 2 years we'll hit a $500,000 deficit. So what we need to do in order to remain solvent, in order to keep funding throughout the rest of the year, throughout the whole semester, throughout the whole academic year, is we need to cut $250,000 from our budget for the next 2 years. $250,000 from next year and $250,000 from the year after that. The implications of not doing that is that when we run out of money, all funding stops. We have essentially two kinds of costs. We have fixed costs and variable costs. Our fixed costs will be paid out throughout the year. That includes our printing and wages and everything like that, our benefits to our employees. The variable costs, when we run out of money, the money's gone. We don't have the ability to, we don't have lenders, we can't borrow from a bank, we can't borrow from the university, we can't borrow from another tier 3. So what happens is if we hit 0 in the middle of the year, we stop all funding. So we don't think that's the right way to go, because that means when we hit 0, any request that comes to us after that is going to be denied. So we want to make sure we're able to fund throughout the whole semester, and every group is able to get as much money as they can. So our slideshow is going to go through each one of these cuts, justify why we are proposing this, how much it's going to save in terms of our total budget deficit. But I also wanted to show a suggestion, my suggestion. I have no say in this because I'm not going to be president in 2 days. For what kind of cuts we can make internally. Just a quick note about how our budget is, what our budget is comprised of. More than two-thirds of our budget actually is from Funding Board. So more than two-thirds of our money, of our dollars are going out the door to tier 2 groups. Of the other roughly 1/3 of our budget, half of that is fixed costs. That's our employees, that's our printing, that's our contractual obligations with student activities, information technology. We can't really touch that too much. I did squeeze a little bit out of our fixed costs, but less than half of the remaining 1/3 of our non-funding board budget can be cut. So just some suggestions I made for non-funding board cuts would be our professional wages and student wages. We have a professional employee leaving for another company. If we rehire his position at $15 an hour, we can save $8,700 roughly. If we rehire at his position at $15 an hour, we can save $8,700. Our student wages can be reduced by if every senior graduating and every student not planning on working here next year is not rehired, those positions are gone now, we can save about $16,000. So that's $25,000 in fixed costs that we can cut. That's as much as I can squeeze out of fixed costs. Otherwise, we're going to end up firing our bookkeepers, firing our receptionists, and then really bookkeeping isn't going to be done at all, and no one can get funding. So these other costs down here are our variable costs that aren't in Funding Board. We allow each committee, currently under our policies, to have $10 per person per meal 3 times a semester. So over the course of a year, we have the ability to spend up to $6,300 on catering for USG. My suggestion is that gets cut. My suggestion is USG doesn't have any fall banquet. The banquets, because no one in USG gets paid, is our only form of compensation. But I suggest that we only have 1 banquet at the end of the year for our compensation rather than 2. I also suggest we cap our spring banquet at $7,000. which could save an additional $3,000. And the rest of, between this money and those I just talked about, to get to $250,000, we need to cut $23,500 in other sorts of events. That means reducing our spending on Student Appreciation Day. That means reducing or eliminating our care packages for finals. That means no more Let Them Eat Cake events. Some of the events that we do every year are going to have to be eliminated.
Some of which you'll see this upcoming weekend as well.
Yeah, some of them that are happening this week at Spring Weekend we will not be able to have next year. But that's the sacrifice we must make in order to get to the number $250,000 in 1 year. And I'll come back to this when we get to this slide. But now we'll go through each 4 of these changes that Rich and I have proposed. Does anybody have any questions on our budget, how it's comprised, the fixed cost, variable cost, that kind of stuff? Okay, I know it's boring. Okay, so our first suggestion was to cut the max funding cap from $12,000 to $10,000. This is a list of groups from last academic year that got more than $10,000 in funding. Some had it multiple semesters, like Men's Crew. Some only had it one, like UC Thunder Ross. But this is in at least one semester got at least $10,000. So it impacts roughly 35 groups. We'll save approximately $60,000 a year by reducing that cap, which is about 24% of our budget deficit. Does anybody have thoughts, questions, concerns, anything? We are here to listen and answer your questions. Yes.
All right, so
Can you state what group you're from as well? Your name and your group, please.
Sure. So I'm Nick Jayakar. I'm from Formula SAE. And I guess my thought on this is you're cutting from the groups that if they're spending $12,000, they need it. You know, I can speak personally from Formula SAE. We need every single dollar that we have because that car costs a hell of a lot more than $12,000, and those costs are almost exclusively going into raw materials, and we do all the machining, manufacturing, and stuff ourselves. So, I mean, you're cutting money from I understand the idea of cutting superfluous costs, because a new organization sees, hey, we have $12,000 to spend. Let's go nuts.
So I feel your pain firsthand. I'm part of, all 4 years I've been part of a dance team called UConn Thunder Ross. We're a nationally competing dance team, and we fly literally we're invited all over the country to perform. We use that $12,000 almost every single spring. We use it for costumes, we use it for travel, we use it for lodging, we use it for registration fees. And I know I've been part of an e-board where without this funding, 2 of our members couldn't afford to go. So I feel that very painfully firsthand. If there's any other way, when we go through these policies, that you see a way to fairly reduce 24% or to save $60,000, I will be more than happy to listen and take that into consideration. This was one of the things that very helplessly and selflessly, in my opinion, for this one, for me, I had to say, what is something that we can cut fairly that will be able to save $60,000, 24% of our deficit.
Another point, quickly, just to your point, is that we know that Men's Crew, Formula SAE, skydiving, consistently use that $12,000, and they're not wasting it. They're not just saying, oh, we have $3,000 more left to spend, let's go crazy. But there are some groups, even on this list, where they'll say, okay, we have $4,000 left for USG funding this semester. Let's justify and buy a bunch of stuff that we may not need, but we can get because we can get $12,000. So while there may be some groups like yours who, you need that money, there are also groups who kind of are taking money away from other groups by buying things they don't need. I saw your hand first, and then you.
So I have 2 things.
Can you state your name and group, please?
Alex, and the Skydiving Club, and the Veteran Service Organizations. So shouldn't that be more of a burden of the funding board to be more rigorous when they're researching what they're approving and what they're not approving, rather than just slashing everyone's funding across the board?
Mm-hmm. So what happens is, if a group can justify buying X number of widgets, funding board will approve it because
it doesn't violate policy.
It doesn't violate policy. And then what happens if they do deny it for something that they see as superfluous? They go to appeals board and say, well, there's nothing against policy. And appeals board is almost obligated to say, if it doesn't violate policy, you can't deny it.
The reason we're trying to put everything in the policies is so that spending like that doesn't happen. We need something to refer to our documents, which is, we live religiously by whatever governs us, to be able to point to something and say, this is why we can't spend the money. As opposed to, we know, behind the scenes after we give away funding what happens to it, because we know people in the group. We know, things outside of USG office, outside of our policies that, groups are spending this money on. But there's nothing even I can do as funding board 2 years ago. If somebody justifies, says, here's the policy, I'm not violating it, you must fund me, and they're right.
So is there, sorry.
Yep, that's fine.
So doesn't that mean we should change the policy rather than going ahead with this? What's the process for changing the policy and what kind of timeline can that be on?
So there's no policy that you would be able to write that says if funding board sees something as superfluous, you can deny it.
Well, no, it would take time to go through and find exacting language to weed out things like that. But
So you mean
To make exceptions.
if X group gets X number of widgets, that's their cap. Like that
It's
kind
hard
of
to-
language then becomes if you're writing in specific groups into policy, which we did last weekend. People were not happy. If you start writing specific rules for specific groups based on what they're buying, it gets really tough because then people think, and maybe justifiably so, that you're targeting them as wasteful spenders when they may not be.
Dan, see ya.
Yep.
Hey guys, so I'm the new comptroller elect for next year. I'm Sia Sidani, and I do want to say something about that. We are looking into a new inventory system. So our programs committee, we are going to be testing that out next year. So that will really help in terms of accounting for what we have and how we can save that money. And will be going into effect next year. And I promise you that we will be working on that.
So the inventory system will also be really good. If a group wants to buy a GoPro, don't buy a GoPro, rent it from us for free. That we have, how many groups? 20, 30 groups buying GoPros. Not every group needs to buy a GoPro if we can have 6 here in the SOC that can be rented out occasionally. So those kinds of things we're looking at to save money as well. That maybe we're not writing into policy, but when we see a request for a GoPro, we email them and say, hey, just come to the SOC, you can rent ours for the weekend. Things like that. You were next, and then you. Yep.
Sure.
What's your name?
So Steven Strasser, I'm from men's crew. So when I see a sweeping cut, I completely understand and empathize with these budget restraints. It makes total sense. We deal with a lot of money in our organization, changing hands, fundraising. I know all these clubs probably do. My only comment is, it's kind of been stated before, but is there any hope of any kind of petition process, or just some way that we could sit down with you, maybe just go over what we intend to do with our funding per semester, and hopefully maybe squeeze out an extra 1,000 or 2,000. I know I know this is a slippery slope, but coming from I've been involved with rowing for a while, but this is I'm also a Husky ambassador, and whenever I have Huskies, I tell them how much funding we get from our school, and it blows them away, and it makes me so proud to be a Husky. I just feel like you guys are cutting something that is so
Is necessary.
essential to what makes us competitive.
Dan and I fought about this. He loves me he loves you guys more than you guys realize. We've thought about this a lot.
We talked about crew for an hour and a half.
Yeah, for a
saying
long
how
time.
can we write an exception for crew because they
Crew
compete at
and
the
Formula
D1 level? How can we give an exception to Formula SAE because we know they're using the money responsibly? The problem is if we make an exception for you, we have to make an exception for everyone. If we make an appeal process, say let's justify the extra $2,000, we then have to give that opportunity to every single group on this list. And then we end up giving the $2,000 out anyway, which then now we're in the whole $60,000.
It was my view that it's really hard to write in the policies an exception for a certain group, let alone a certain category. It would be different if there was something like club sports, something like that we write into the rules as opposed to crew specifically or Formula SAE specifically. That doesn't make us sound like we're, showing any type of favoritism. It's hard to justify writing an exception for specific groups. That was my view on it, and this is, keeping it across the board for every group was the only way I saw fair.
Yeah, up here in front.
Yeah, my question was, I guess how, like, when the requests that come in later in the year, like the group recognizes, well, I have, $4,000 left, let's get some equipment. Like, how strict are these checked against like an informational budget that's done like early on to show that they're, that this was something that they had budgeted for in the first place? Because I feel like a lot of those kind of like extraneous or sort of requests that come later on, like you wouldn't have had that on an informational budget if you just thought of it, seeing that you had $4,000 left.
Right. So last year we instituted a new type of informational budget. Before that, the budget was binding. Whatever you predicted the semester before very specifically had to be followed when you were actually requesting the funds. And what we saw happening was groups were losing out on funding because there's always unforeseen costs, unforeseen expenses that happen when you're actually going through the process of acquiring funding, right? You don't know a semester in advance exactly what you'll need.
Or if
So-
Thunder Ross gets into nationals, it's
Right.
impossible to predict it on their budget a semester prior. So things like
So
that.
what we ended up doing was making the budget non-binding. That means you give us a budget of approximately what you think you'll spend, and it won't bind you, but it's a way for me as comptroller to be able to show. If somebody was to come in and audit me and say, Comptroller, how did you set your budget for funding board for this semester? I could say, this is what the groups requested. Based on historical data, this is what I cut it to. So the groups requested $1.2 million, $1.3 million in their informational budget. I looked at historical data and said, you know what, I don't think that they're going to spend that whole $1.2 million. So I cut it down to $880,000, which is historically how much funding board spends anyways. But if anyone was to come up to me and ask me why, where are you getting these numbers from, I have the informational budget to prove that I'm not making these numbers up. These are the numbers that the students requested. Funding board then, when the funds are actually requested, will go back, and one of the questions on the request form is, was this stated in your informational budget?
Right.
So if groups say no, then they can take a look at it and you can ask why or why not. It wasn't stated in their information.
But then would it always be like a yes? I mean, I get the sort of the
So-
unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah, definitely.
For travel, if you make it to national or something like that. But like, is that because there's no like I guess policy that'll exclude it if it doesn't go against policy? Is that always a yes? If you say that no, it wasn't in our informational, but we need 60 GoPros,
So
it's fine.
it's tough because we thought that and I still believe that the pros of making an informational budget non-binding outweigh the cons of having a binding budget and forcing groups to predict what they need a semester before. I can't tell you how many groups would come to us and complain and say,
Groups
we're
lost
making
a
it
lot.
impossible. We used to have a two-step funding process where you have to submit a budget and then that is approved or denied or cut or whatever. Then we have a disbursement request. So like for 2 out of the 4 years I've been here, we've had a two-step process. Part of the reason why we're able to give out more funding now is because we've made that easier, which I think is good. I don't think it should be 2 steps for you to get your funding. It's twice the amount of work. We all have exams. We all have things to do.
We all have officer transitions. That's something people overlook. When one officer thinks that you need, one board thinks that you need this much for a semester, and the next board comes and wants to take on more initiatives, that's where we saw a big clash. If you have a turnover
I
of
can't tell you how many CFOs went rogue, or a group would come to us and say, our
They didn't just
CFO,
go.
whose
They just
job
leave.
it was to come up with their binding budget, would just check out. They got into grad school, they're graduating, whatever. They check out and they're screwed. And so our non-binding budgets allow groups to start thinking about what they want a semester prior without locking them into that funding. It saved us time, saved everyone else time. The implication is, though, that sometimes groups may be able to buy some things that they may not need because they're eligible for $12,000 of funding. And the reason we're cutting this from 12 to 10 is not because we think groups are wasting that extra $2,000. That's not why. But I was just saying, based on what the gentleman from USG was saying, was that yes, some groups need all $12,000, but not every group on this list needs the $12,000 they spend. Yes, you, and then, oh, I'm sorry, you. He was next, and then we'll do you two right next. Go ahead, name and group, please.
Matt Tanullo from club hockey and rugby as well. I'm just curious why you're doing this so soon over a 2-year period. I feel like it could be extended a little longer. and then the hit from that $2,000 could be less. I intended to come in here and say that Hawk spends every dollar we need, but I think every group says that.
Yeah.
So what I think may need to happen is that instead of doing it over a 2-year period, do it over a longer period so that groups can adjust, streamline their spending, figure out where they might not be, not so much wasting, but not spend it, maybe
And that's a
cut
really
some
fair
costs,
point.
but yeah.
Yeah, so she'll pull up our SBAC budget, which is the budget that we present to the Student Fee Advisory Committee. And what you'll see is that's not really an option. If we continue spending, or even if we reduce the cuts we're making by half, we're still going to run out of money within that 2-year period, which means all funding stops. So she's going to show you that when we pull up the budget, you'll see that if we were to keep spending the same, I would say, so the end of next fiscal year, we run, I think it's $180,000 or $189,000 deficit. That's after 1 year. That means I'm guessing approximately 3/4 of the way through the academic year next year, if we spend the same, every request gets denied 3/4 of the way through because we're out of money. So if we kind of reduce these, maybe we'll survive the first year. But then the second year, when we're projecting a $500,000 deficit, we'll only make it through a third of the year, and every request after that then gets denied.
I guess why was this not foreseen earlier so that change could be made earlier rather than just in this 2 years, wow, we're going to get running out of money?
Yeah.
Why was this not 4 years down the line, 5 years down the line, realize, is there no one that kind of focuses on like the
Yeah.
future and where we're going?
So that's our job. And our freshman year, we actually saw we had an $800,000 surplus. So our freshman year, 2014, we increased the funding amount. We increased the caps from 65 to 75, did some other changes, because it's not responsible to have an $800,000 deficit. Now we've gotten to the surplus, sorry. It's not responsible to have an $800,000 surplus. So we said, let's give students more money. Let's increase the percent to 75%. Let's make it easier to apply. Now that we've kind of, she's going to show you, we've reached a budget where in 2 years we'll be at surplus 0. That's what our goal was over the last 4 years. Now is the point where we say, okay, now it's time to adjust it back to where we were. You'll see that, well, I think it's this third slide. We're going from 75% for category C, D, and E back down to 65%. That's what it was 3 years ago. So we're kind of done with the honeymoon period where everyone's used to getting as much funding as they can, $12,000, 75%. This is the point where we are now at, we have to say, let's go back to the way it was. If we did it any sooner, in my opinion, we would have been cheating groups out of well-deserved funding, and if we do it any later, we'll end up stopping funding midway through a semester.
And we got into our rules this year, right? So we have to pick up what was left off. This is what was left off. So let me explain this. It's a little complicated. You want to look at the actual numbers and the updated numbers, because that, after I picked up my term, is what I was able to update based on the spending we've done so far, based on what we actually ended up spending at the end of June 2016 and so on. So at the end of fiscal year 16, last year, we projected that at the end of the year, your fund balance would be $414,000.
Now that's down from 3 years ago, $800,000.
Right, because we increased the caps and we put the limit at 12,000, so on and so forth. Then you look at FY updated. So when I had to submit this budget in December, I looked up until now what USG had spent. And based on that, this is what was predicted last year. They said this is what we think you're going to spend next year. This is what we actually looked like we were going to spend. So 11,000 you end up with at the end of the year based 111,000 at the end of this year based on all the spending that we were doing, based on the increased number of groups, and based on the increased number of requests. Then, and this was, again, original was made last year, so you look at the updated numbers. If we took everything that we spent in the updated column of FY17, so everything that I updated based on the spending this year, and I copy-pasted those amounts into FY18 updated.
That's what we mean by just spending staying the same, assuming we don't spend anything more than we spent the previous year.
Right, all else constant. No more groups, no more requests, everything stays the same. You're at $189,000 deficit.
And what that means in real life terms is 3/4 of the way through the year, funding is done. Because we have no money. We can't borrow money. Once we hit 0, no more funding requests will be accepted.
Then I copy-pasted those numbers. If we spend in 2 years from now, if we spend like we are right now, $490,000 deficit. And this is what we want forth and presented anyways. This is originally, Dan and I didn't want to cut anything. So this is what we presented, and we were shut down and sent back to fix those numbers. So now this is, there we go. This is our new propositions. This is based on, we looked at what are groups spending the most, what are we spending the most on? We're spending the most on things like catering, contractuals, so on and so forth. And based on that, we cut from where we were spending the most, right? That makes sense? So we cut where we were spending the most and brought it from 2 years in the same manner as I explained before. We sent them the new numbers of having $4,000 in our budget
Which
for
is
2
essentially
years.
zero.
Right, which is
It's a
essentially
negligible
zero.
amount of money. Another point too, why didn't we wait? Another thing is we can't wait because now there's more groups. We now have more than 700 groups. When I started, there was just over like 550 or something like that. We now have 700 groups. Last semester, we got requests from over 400 of those groups. When I was a freshman, we were getting group requests from 250, maybe 300 groups. So now, if every group wants to share in the same amount of money, we have to give a little less to each group. So that's kind of a factor as well. So between increasing the amount we were funding, we have to now go back to the levels we were, so we've reached zero at this point based on this budget, and we have more groups asking for more money. So in order to share the wealth, we kind of have to reduce it for everybody.
Right, and something that, another important thing to understand is that we weren't allowed. We were told that we aren't allowed to spend the same as we are right now. That's why we were asked to redo the budget.
We run out of money. You were next with the Mickey Mouse shirt.
Also in the back.
And we have one right here. Okay, raise your hands if you want to talk. Can someone write down, I don't know, descriptions of people's clothes? I don't know how to do this. But keep your hands raised. He's going to write you down. So you were next, and then. And also, USG members.
Yeah, can I respond to like a Senate perspective?
Quickly,
Yeah.
but just USG members that are here.
Wait, let's go.
Yeah, I'm going to ask USG members not to speak just because we have non-USG members here to speak. So Miles, go quickly.
Oh, okay.
While
Well,
Shlomo's looking.
Real quick, I'm one of the senators representing the School of Engineering. I've been in 2 or 3 of those organizations on that list. So just so you know, there are senators who will be voting on this here listening, and thank you all for coming. And also thanks Dan and Rich for taking time out of your day to set up all this information for us. I just wanted to say real quick that after they got that SBAC verdict that we need to reduce money, their first idea wasn't, oh, let's just cut money to the student groups. Their first move was to say, where can we as USG cut our own internal budget? And we had probably the most contentious debate we've had in Senate this year between Dan and I, and we're normally very good friends, but we weren't that day, because they were trying to cut money, $3,000 to $4,000 from each of the committee budgets. So we, just like you as a committee, said, no, we need this money to give handouts for Student Appreciation Day or to do these events that we need to do. And we ended up I ended up losing that debate, and they did cut our budget. And just last Friday we had Student Appreciation Day. Hopefully some of you guys got some free handouts, and we were able to make it work. So although it might be tough, like Dan was saying, now you say, oh, we need $12,000, but the truth of it is, just 2 or 3 years ago, you weren't getting $12,000, and your club was still in existence. So although it's tough, if we share the burden, it becomes less tough on all of us. So just something to consider as we keep talking.
Yeah. Can you state your name and what group you're in?
Yeah, I'm Shannon. I'm from Yukon Swingin' Blues. And this has already kind of been touched upon, but I wasn't really getting a clear answer. So, of course, all of the clubs here are going to use that $12,000 and use it effectively, but not necessarily every club needs that $10,000. But certain clubs, including my club, the basis on which it functions is hiring live bands and hiring coaches, which are very expensive. So
That's why you're on this list.
yeah. So is there any way that there could be like an appeal process or an application form to get extra funding?
Then we have to do that for every group, and then we're not saving the money. And then we're cutting some other, we're cutting, this category C to 50%. Then we're cutting, you're gonna get cut somewhere else. If we don't change this, it's gotta change somewhere else. We're gonna change airfare from 300 to 250. We're gonna change the coaching cap from 3,000 to 2,500, or category B cut, which I'm proposing tonight as in lieu of the coaching cut, from 90 to 80%. You're gonna get cut somewhere.
So if anyone who needs these funds in this room can think of one sentence, one line that we can add to our policies that someone else in this group of people who need the $12,000 would not object to, we'll be more than happy to consider it. I tried. I'm telling you, my group is on here. We need that. I tried. But I know if I stated what I stated for my group, you guys would be like, but wait, what about mine?
I don't know on the list,
Oh, yeah.
but I had a comment on that.
Sure.
What do you want?
Well, let's just stay with the order for now.
Okay, I'll add you to that.
Also, just keep in mind, everybody, that we have three more of these slides with significant changes as well. I can stay here all night. I know we all have busy things to do. Who's next?
Sure.
You were next. Yep. Name and group.
So Nick, we're from the cycling team. Just to go off kind of what my partner here was saying in regards to clubs kind of seeing that they have extra funds left over and being able to spend them, and you talking about the two-step process. I know you said that it was a lot of work, and you kind of we didn't really come here to just whine about getting this $2,000 budget cut and not come here with solutions. We want to help you guys also be able to make these budget cuts in a way that works out for you guys, because you have to do these budget cuts in the first place. But my question, I guess, would be in maybe reinstating the two-step process. It would be more work, but for these clubs like Crew and skydiving, who use all of their funding, obviously if they care as much about the funding as they say they do, they're going to put in this work, and they're going to come up with these budgets that are going to be set in stone. And also in regards to the unforeseen expenses, you have teams like this who have the potential to make it to nationals. Maybe they could state somewhere in their strict budget that in case they get into X situation, then they're going to need Y amount of dollars, and this is something that they can lay out, and then you guys can see where they're actually going to need. So there's not
I just want to clarify one of my statements. The reason we're cutting this from 12 to 10, well, why we suggest we cut it from 12 to 10, is not only because we think that there's groups that waste the money, it's that there's only so many places we can cut. I don't want everyone here to think that we're cutting to 10,000 because there's a few groups on here that waste that money. In all honesty, we can't afford to give out $12,000 to every group, even the groups that need it. I'm trying to be honest with you. So I'm just saying that's not the only reason we're cutting it this way.
So and I'm speaking on just behalf of myself here. I hear what you're saying, and that is something, for right now, the way the budget is, the way you saw, this is something that needs to be done, but for the next administration, like the future comptroller is standing right here, for the future administration, that is a discussion that I'm willing to have with them to say, because they can amend the policies at the beginning of next year as well. We want to leave it in a place that you're not in a deficit, which is why we're trying to pass these policies. They can amend the policies at the beginning of next year. So I am personally willing to sit down with the next administration and say, hey, we want to make the budget process a bit stricter, and if there's money left over, if there's something that we can do to help these 35 groups out, then we're willing to do that. And that's something that right now I have to say that this needs to be passed the way it is because we don't have any system in place. That's something that I personally can assure you that I will have a discussion with the future administration to do, hopefully by the beginning of next year.
Are the people on the speakers list wanted to comment on this? Who's next?
So the next one is the gentleman in the suit.
Not that fancy.
I'm just gonna call you out. What are you wearing? Because that's
Yeah, no, it's a two-part thing. It's with
Sure.
the coaching funding as well. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Nick Worley. I'm hoping to speak on Wednesday too when a lot of voters are there as well. But so I just want to give you a little bit of experience of what I've done. Co-founded a couple organizations, the president of the men's rugby team, and a culture organization. And so I've really had a good understanding of the process of how it has worked. And with talking with a lot of the other club sports and with a lot of the other organizations, it's not like they're spending money on airfare. A lot of them are taking vans and buses, and so they are trying very hard to cut down on the spending. It's not like they can really swim to the locations. It's very difficult, but we could talk about. And I appreciate the thought that you guys have taken into finding ways to cut the budget, but I think that there should be a better solution to kind of the coaching fees because.
I'm excited to show you my proposal because I think you might be more
Okay.
amicable.
But also with regards to this,
Yeah.
I think there should be some other way to change the funding because again, there's a lot that could be done. And what I suggest, and I've had the privilege of working with some kind of innovative minds and companies, and what something they told me about in college is that it's really what you do with the experience, and people are able to find their interest in stuff like that. And with working with community standards as well, the kids that have kind of struggled to find their way in college, they've done so by finding organizations that they're interested in, and not by kind of let them eat cake these other organizations. So with regards to that, I do suggest cutting down more on the events that are kind of just already there, that people have the option of going to, and keeping the funding that groups can decide to go to.
And that's our intention. So when I came up with $23,500 for events, for committee events, there are some things that we do that are a committee event that we can't cut. So for example, external affairs, 3 or 4 times a semester, goes to Hartford and testifies before the General Assembly. And we've won back $20 million of a $40 million cut because of that. We can't kind of cut those kinds of activities. There's things that other committees do that are advocacy-based. We don't want to cut those things because that's a lot of our mission is advocacy-based. But things like Student Appreciation Day, where people choose to go or to not go, can we cut something like that? I think yes. Can we cut academic affairs, finals giveaways? I think we can. Those are things that not every student in this room can get access to because we don't have $19,000 of those drawstring bags to give out to everybody. But this funding is really important. So that's why I wanted to show everybody that with these cuts, we have to make USG cuts. Again, it's tough because less than half of 1/3 of our non-funding board budget is eligible to be cut. But we can cut as much as we can from there, and that's my plan. And then on the next slide, we have the a proposal to substitute the coaches cut with something else.
Yep. And I do have one more point. I appreciate you guys, and obviously there's someone that's going to be upset with these budget cuts, and I do definitely understand that. But with regards to the coaching cut, a lot of these coaches are, I know a lot of the teams are Division I, and the women's rugby team is Division I national champions, and they have really well-known coaches in their organization. And I know for our group personally, coaches spend over 240 hours, and we're a high-risk sport, so we have to have assistant coaches that make sure that the students of UConn are safe. And so with regards to cutting the coaching funding, by cutting the coaching funding, it's not only saving money, but it's impacting the welfare of the UConn students, because we have to make sure that we're safe with a lot of these club sports, because a lot of the organizations on here are club sports, and they're going to be the ones that are hurt.
Like I mentioned, I do hear you. I'm taking note of the $12,000 caps being necessary and of the coaching. Like I said, that is something that I'm open to talking to the next administration about.
And if you all say that you like my second proposal better, then we'll really strongly consider going with that. It may be less beneficial to USG, maybe more beneficial to USG. I want to hear what you guys think about that policy specifically, because I think you guys might like it a little more than.
About like 7 people. So 7 more people on this topic so far.
Okay, does anybody else want to be added to that list? Because I would prefer if we move on to the coaches. And anyone who wants to talk about this can come see me after, email me, all sorts of stuff. But let's go with that list.
With the list? Okay, so next we have someone from SAE in the back there.
Hi, I'm Matt Kramer from SAE. And you may have a slide on this coming up, I'm not sure of your presentation. But I know for teams like us, or teams like skydiving who are competitive with teams around the world, I know maybe we could send this for a couple of years with lower funding. But I'm wondering what your plan is after that. Do we get the funding back? What ends up happening with that?
It depends on the spending.
Yeah.
So for the reason that which we're going to talk about, the reason that it's 75% right now for certain categories is because we had extra money. So we were able to push it up. Now that we've gone through that money, we have to bring it back down and bring it back to a balanced spending, as opposed to spending $75,000. So if 2 years out, you know, they have extra money in the account, I'm sure that they're going to bring the cap back up, or I'm sure they're going to increase your percentages.
Our goal is to hover around zero surplus. If that means we have a $100,000 surplus, that money should be given out the next year. And that's USG's intention. I do have bad news though. I hate to share bad news, but this plan is a 2-year plan. We are still spending more than our fee revenue, even with this plan, every semester. That means after 2 years, if we continue this level of spending without increasing revenue, we then have to make more cuts because there's the same amount of spending and more groups. So a solution that we may have to look at, which the Board of Trustees isn't really into at the moment, and maybe 2 years down the road they will, is increasing USG's fees. And I think we have a pretty good case for it, saying, okay, if we increase USG's fee by $5 per semester, that's $10 a year, times 20,000 students, that's $200,000 that we can put towards funding board. We have had a $45 fee for as long as I've been here, and I think as long as our bookkeepers have been here. We're funding more groups with more requests. So my request, or the future president and comptroller or vice president's request of the Board of Trustees should be, look, we're funding more groups with the same amount of money, and we're having them cut. And groups like Formula SAE can't survive with $5,000 of funding, which is, if we keep going down this road, that's what happens. So cuts are good for the short term, but eventually we're going to have to look at revenue and really make a strong case. I know President-elect Valverde has said she wants to start this process next year. Even if it gets denied, get that process rolling, get the Board of Trustees thinking about how we do funding. So she's going to propose a fee increase next year, I believe. She said that to me at least in private, so surprise. That's what she says she wants to do. Even if she knows it's going to be unsuccessful because the Board of Trustees doesn't want to increase the fee, it gets them starting to think about, we need a fee increase. And $10 a student isn't unreasonable, and it makes us be able to fund crew and Formula SAE and skydiving without continued cuts. But this is only a 2-year plan. Whatever happens 2 years down the road depends on if we get a fee increase, depends on if the number of clubs just drastically drops. Like, I don't know if a bunch of clubs disband, then we'll be fine. But the way it's going now is 2 years down the road, we're gonna have to start looking at revenue.
All right, so the person in the green shirt.
All right. I actually had, so Alex from Skydiving and Veterans. I had 2 things to ask. One was actually about the fee increase, because I worked it out and it seems like $7 a semester per undergraduate student with 18,000 students would give you a little over $250,000 in revenue.
Yep.
But it sounds like there are additional challenges associated with that.
So one, it goes to student referendum. I don't think a student fee increase referendum has ever failed, but let me give you an example of Nutmeg. They went for a fee increase this year, I think, of $3 per semester. The student body, the vast majority of the student body said they were okay with that. But that referendum is only a recommendation to the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees has said, we don't want fee increases other than a $20 transit fee so people can get to take this new bus line, and a $700 visa compliance fee. That's now, it's basically a federal unfunded mandate that we have to increase the fee. Other than that, the Board of Trustees is, just no on any other fee increase. So at the moment, we would be laughed out of the room if we kind of made the case. So I wish it was as easy as saying, we solve our whole desktop problem with $7 a semester. I would love to raise it by $7 a semester because I think most people can afford that. But it's not our choice, it's the Board of Trustees' choice.
The second thing I want to say, which is a no-fee increase solution, is have we looked at anything similar to what Club Sports is doing, where they have funding tiers? Basically, how much participation your club puts in determines what tier of funding they're eligible for. So every club or every organization would be eligible for a basic level of funding, and then based on your club's participation in university events, other USG events, you'd be eligible for more funding.
That's how is right. Fine.
Well, yeah, kind of. So we have 3 tiers of funding. We would then, in your solution, kind of be then tier 2s into 3 separate categories, which is, I suppose, feasible. It's just how do you quantify that? And that's tough. We thought about it. We thought about that with Greek organizations. Maybe we make 2 kinds of, like this is what we thought about when we proposed the Greek organization change. I don't know if you're aware of the proposal that was made last week that was then struck down, which is fine. Not my choice, completely fine. We wanted to tier it like that, so based on types of organizations, then it's just kind of tough.
Right now it's tiered on whether the entire undergraduate student population can benefit from that event, and then also by the group's active participation in the event.
Oh yeah, so we kind of do have tiers.
Yeah.
It's not based on the group itself, but based on the activity that that group is requesting for. So if you request an event that only is, you're restricting participation just to your group plus 1 or something like that, you get 75%. If your event is open to everyone, we fund it 100%. So we do save money that way. So if only, just your club is getting funding, only your club can go to an event, you shouldn't get 100% funding for that event. You should be able to, the group should be responsible for contributing some part of that.
I guess what I was looking at, or what I was thinking of, was something more comprehensive. Like what Club Sports is doing is saying how many members does your club have, how many hours of service do you guys put in, and then those are the things that go into determining what tier of funding you're relevant.
Yeah, and we did think about that. We thought about that in terms of number of people who participate, dues that are collected, but then you get into all sorts of problems like, okay, men's crew collects dues, right? Then you guys get screwed on your funding. So our intention is if you have high dues, well then you may not need the $12,000, but clearly that's not true. So it is a little more new, like you said, it's more nuanced.
I think it should be the other way around. The more you pay for dues and the higher budget you have, the more money you should get, because we're asking all this from our members.
That's how Club Sports does it. So
in theory, if you charge more for dues, then your organization would have more money, would be more self-funded, so they would theoretically request less, or they would be in greater need.
So there's one problem with doing it based on dues, and I actually had a meeting with our financial advisor this morning, and she kind of agreed with me on this. If a group is collecting dues, we don't have control over what you do with that money. We don't. That's up to you what you spend that money. You could spend that money on a trip, you could spend that money on whatever. When we give you money, though, it all ends up being, in the same pool of money. If you use your dues, and I'm not saying crew does this, but some group, let's say some group uses their dues for some thing that wouldn't be in USG's policies, like alcohol, for example, we're essentially subsidizing alcohol because you wouldn't have to use that money for alcohol if you use it towards the things that USG is paying for, So if I've been saying this like for the past week, if I use $100 in if I spend $100 in alcohol a week, a month, a month. I could spend that $100. If I spend $100 on alcohol a week, a month. Step 1 out of 12 is done. Okay. If I spend $100 a month on gas and $100 a month on alcohol, and I say, Mom, I'm really struggling to afford my gas, but I don't cut my alcohol budget, my mom gives me $100, she's essentially paying for my alcohol. We can't control what people do with their dues, and if we start categorizing based on dues, then USG money is kind of going towards things that maybe they shouldn't be going towards based on our policies.
And the business office would have an issue.
And the business office then says,
even if it got past us, that's something that our
they're then going to start asking you, where's every dollar of your dues going? If they find out it goes, $1 goes towards something that's against USG policy, well, then you lose your funding.
But aren't we responsible by that, just through the Community Standards Office anyway?
So if you're
just as a student organization leader, that we're held to the same standards as everybody.
I suppose, but there's groups that I assume do it, and if we start asking the questions.
So what's wrong with that? Like,
well, then you're asking if we student communities. The community standards will hold us to.
There's things in our policies that aren't against community standards. If you use your dues for giveaways, that's not against community standards, but it's against our policies, and then we're essentially subsidizing giveaways. If you use that money to buy T-shirts, which is specifically said in our policies, we cannot fund apparel, we're then subsidizing that apparel. It's not, alcohol was just an example that I gave, but there's things in our policies, you can tell what I have in my mind. There's things in our policies that aren't against community standards that are against our policies because we won't fund it.
So what you're basically saying is if we get $12,000 and it pays for something legitimate, if we take our dues money and we use it for something that is against USG policy,
Right.
it's the same as spending USG money on
In
those
the eyes of the
items.
business office, yes, because you can use that money towards the 12,000, whatever you bought for $12,000. That's how they view it. And it's kind of the same thing as if you use dues to buy t-shirts and you're saying this $12,000 is integral to the success of our group and you don't reduce your t-shirt budget, we're paying for t-shirts.
So how are we supposed to buy t-shirts if it's against USG policy and our dues money
Well, I'm
violates
saying,
that?
as of right now, if we don't ask the questions, you can do it. But if we start saying, if you collect dues, we need to know where that money goes, I'm just saying it's not as cut and dry as saying, if you get dues, you should get more money. Because then there's a whole host of extra questions and things that...
That's not something even we thought about. That was something that was brought to Dan by the business.
Yeah. So they're going to be really strict on that, and I'm not sure everyone wants to be under that kind of scrutiny.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm not sure everyone. Who's next on the speakers list?
Alright, so gentleman from crew sweatshirt.
Yeah, that's just basically what I was talking about. If there was a tier system, then you would be able to cut more across the board rather than just the organizations up there. Because it seems like the 12 to 10 just affects those organizations, and you keep saying that you want to cut across the board, but this cut in particular only affects the ones on that list.
Right. So if we were to get rid of this and we did more percentage cuts, which the coaching I'm replacing with a percentage cut. But if then you start saying, okay, some of these groups get speakers, like speakers to come and talk to your group, and it's open to all students. If we get rid of this cut, then category A, which is events on campus open to everyone, then has to be reduced to a percentage, and then groups are paying out of pocket.
We need to find that 60,000.
You need to get the 60,000 somewhere, and you know if this actually means some groups, not Formula SAE, not skydiving, not men's crew, have the opportunity to reduce it so they still don't have any out-of-pocket expenses, but they're just hitting $10,000 and they give up something else. If you then institute a percentage cut on category A, for example, you won't get the fund until you give us some money out of pocket. If you get a purchase order for an event that's on campus, open to everyone, and you owe 15% to that, because we've reduced it to 85% funding, we can't release a purchase order to your group until you give us the 15%. So now there's out-of-pocket expenses. So the reason we did this is try to avoid some out-of-pocket expenses, because most of these groups, unfortunately, unlike crew, unlike Formula SAE, unlike skydiving, most of these groups could probably reduce their budgets to $10,000 and incur no out-of-pocket expense.
Could we move on to the next few slides? So you're pretty sweet.
Does anybody else have something that's completely different than what's been said? Or just a statement instead of a question?
You are on the speakers list.
Yeah.
So should I just...
Yeah,
okay,
go ahead.
Do it.
Alright, so I think with the tier system as well, with the funding, it also spreads out the paying of funding, because everybody thinks that the organization is special. I mean, come on, everybody here ready to make cuts. And it looks like the top 35 are the ones going to be, taking the hits for us. I'm from Pistol Rifle Club, Italian American Society, and Financial Technology. So some clubs like FinTech and Italian American Society, we don't need 12 grand. We couldn't spend 12 grand if we tried. We're closer towards like a 2,500, 3 grand level. If we bring that down to a tier of like 2,500, that way we get squeezed a little bit, we can maybe add some more cash higher up. So instead of getting cut to 10, you get cut to 11, 7.
Yeah, I get that. It's just so hard to write into the policies which groups are at the $3,000 cut cap, which groups are at the $7,000 cut. And the one other thing is, just to clarify that if we get rid of this, and we start doing a more tiered system with each category with a percentage cut, there are groups that get, say, $5,000 in funding, that if you spread the wealth to, in terms of those cuts, they're going to get screwed more than $2,000.
Okay.
So just because these groups get screwed out of $2,000, if you switch it, doesn't mean there aren't other groups that then get screwed out of $2,000.
So say, for example, these are the groups that we want to categorize into a tier. We cannot, it's really hard to categorize college Republicans and some of the cultural organizations. It's hard to find a common ground to be able to tier them
Just from like a
into.
legislative standpoint, how do you do that? Is it based on over the last 3 semesters? If you haven't requested more than $4,000, you're capped at $4,000. Maybe, but it just gets really tough in that way. And in my opinion, that would probably save less money than all the cuts combined. Yeah.
Evan.
I don't know.
Oh, do you?
Yeah,
do you have
really
another
quick, I wanted to address, like, he said, like, the dues, you get audited to see where it's going, so you're not subsidizing anything. As Pistol Rifle Clubs, if we do that, we can't get ammo anymore, we can't
Right.
get firearms unless you start giving us points.
Because, yeah, we don't
Yeah.
fund
If
a
you
lot
want
of
to, we'd be
ammunition.
more than grateful.
Yeah.
So I have 3 more people on this list.
Okay.
So I had someone, a sweatshirt or what is it? Was it someone? Yeah, here. Yeah.
My name is Ben. I'm from the men's club hockey team. That our big concern is our coaching budget. That for us to stay competitive, that we need the highest caliber of coaching that we can get right now. And there's no high caliber coach that lives in the remote Mansfield area.
Can you hold your thought just to the next slide? Because I have something that I think you'll like as a proposal.
As opposed to the one.
And put him first on the speakers list
It's
for the next slide. Can you put him as first?
Sure, yeah, sure thing. And
Anybody else have anything on this?
I had one.
I just had a comment pretty much what you were saying before. Is there any way you could look at like the past 4, 5, 6 semesters, see what these clubs have been, see what all these clubs have been requesting, and then possibly like take maybe a 10% cut from what they've been historically requesting? I know it does put, it's just a way to shift some of the burden onto clubs that, like people have mentioned before, are only requesting 5,000 or so per semester.
So, two things. So those groups are getting major cuts with some of these other things. I don't want people to think that these are the only groups being really harshly cut. There are groups that request exclusively Category C, and total those groups are going to be losing out on 71 grand. Like other groups are being kind of screwed too. But it's just the situation. Like if you start reducing that by 10% more, that's another 100. That's another 71 grand. Like there's no good solution, really, in my opinion, that's going to make everyone happy. And if you say, okay, if we spread this over all groups, well, every group is being affected in some way. Unless a group requests exclusively Category A, every group is being screwed. Every group, including USG. We're going to have fewer student workers. Our SOC is going to close earlier. Yeah. Was there one more person, Shalom?
Nope, that is the end of the list
Okay,
for this
so we
slide.
will move to coaching. Do you want to explain coaching, and then I'll go through my alternative?
Sure. So right now, coaches get $4,000 for the semester. We don't regulate how many practices they have to come to. We don't impose any restrictions on that kind of thing. They're allowed up to $4,000, and then if there's 2 groups, say for example a men's and a women's, and they have both request the same coach, then they get $3,000 each, so $6,000.
No, 2,500. I forgot to put that on here. So the cap for a single group with a single coach is going to be, we propose to be 3,000. If you get a coach from 2
No, I
groups,
mean,
it's
what it is now.
2,500. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, what it is now is that you can request $4,000 right now for a coach. And if you have a men's and a women's team and both are requesting the same coach, they can request $3,000 each. So that's $6,000 for the coaches in total. What we had originally proposed to do is cut that cap down to $1,000 to $3,000. And if they have both men's and a women's team, they're requesting the same coach. Instead of getting $3,000 and $3,000 each, they get $2,500 and $2,500. So now instead of being $4,000 and $6,000, it's $3,000 and $5,000.
Okay, so that saves us $39,000 a year. That's 15.6% of our budget. Last week, a lot of club sports came and said, you're targeting us. So I spoke to last year, I had dinner with last year's funding board chair, and he suggested this change to me, is coaching is in Category B. If you then, rather than say coaching gets cut, you say Category B gets cut, which now you're affecting more groups, which is kind of what some other people are asking, or share the wealth. You're kind of cutting any Category B request. That includes the 3D print, and that includes contractual, so your coaches, your speakers, And that includes supplies and equipment. That's costumes for Thunder Ross. That's 3D printers for the 3D Printing Club. My suggestion, my alternative, is to cut that to 90%. There's two pros. I only put one by accident, but the pro for club sports is that it's not just affecting club sports. Also, you guys are only going to be short $400 rather than $1,000. I think the implication of this is some coaches may be like, I understand there's budget cuts, you know, this isn't a super competitive team, I can deal with $3,000 a semester. Other coaches might be like, what the hell, I'm out of here. Or the group has to come up with $1,000. With this proposal, you'd be getting $3,600, and you have to make up the $400 rather than the $1,000. What this does not mean, though, is if you think, so 90%, you can request $3,600 and get 100% of that. If you request $3,600, you're going to get 90% of $3,600. So no matter what, you're going to be paying out of pocket. We can't release a PO for your coach until you give us 10% of the total cost. So the implication is that you now have to pay out of pocket, which may be the implication if we do this too, but it also affects other groups as well. The benefit for USG, though, where this might be actually mutually beneficial, is that the groups that I'm talking about that go above the $10,000 and say, oh, we have this extra $2,000, let's buy 1 million widgets because we can. They then have to contribute 10%, and they may then say, okay, we don't need 1,000 more widgets because then we have to pay 10% of that cost. Let's just buy what we need. So then that's saving some of that potentially wasteful spending, which isn't a huge problem, but it certainly happens among some of the groups that were on the previous slide. Do people like club sports first? Raise your hand if, as club sports, you would prefer this option. Club sports, raise your hand if you would prefer the first option. Okay. So I just want everyone.
Remember that club sports is eligible to request supplies and equipment. So remember that the money that you're saving in the $1,000 here, if you do request supplies and equipment, you're going to be spending the 10% of that.
So men's
just
crew,
remember that.
if you're ordering oars from us, I don't know what exactly you ordered from us. If you're buying equipment from us, you're then going to be paying 10% out of pocket for that too. So you know, I don't want you to think that you're out 400 versus 1,000 because it may end up that you're still out 1,000. So any capital request, a boat, an oar, Formula SAE is now going to be on the hook for 10% of every nut and bolt you buy with this option. This isn't just for coaching. This is every Category B request.
Can you review all the things that fall under Category B? And like what Category
Yeah,
A is?
so supplies, equipment, contractual, and coaching. So, because coaching is contractual.
Yeah, so when we say contractual, it's if the facility and the service is not available on the UConn Stores campus, we'll pay for you to go somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what's Category A funding?
Category A is any on-campus event that's open to everybody. If Formula SAE, we wouldn't do that, but requests a speaker to come talk about racing cars, and that event is in the student union theater and advertised to every student, you get 100% funding for that.
Sorry?
What was that?
Is there Category C?
Category C is what we're talking about next. Category C is any event that restricts participation. That's going to mean if you go on a trip and you're only taking members of your group, that's Category C.
Any competitions, anything like that.
Okay, does anybody have questions about the alternative versus the original proposal who's not a member of USG?
I know.
Yes.
Is the 10% on top of the going to 12,000 to 10,000?
Yes.
These are all cumulative cuts.
So all four, we have to cut all four of these areas. We have to cut the 12 to 10 somewhere. We have to cut Category B or coaching. We have to cut Category C, and we have to cut airfare. Those are just things we have to do. This wouldn't be in lieu of that. That wouldn't be in lieu. So you're still capped at 10,000, but now you're going to be able to get more for your coaching if with this option, but you're paying 10% for every nut and bolt that you buy. So it saves about the same amount of money for USG, only $2,000 more. It spreads the wealth, like some people have suggested in the room today. but that means that more people are paying out of pocket. That means Formula SAE, you're going to be out $1,200 a semester for the things you want to. Oh, actually $1,000 because it's going to be 10. You're going to be out $1,000. Well, 3,000 total.
Dan, do you want me to go down this one?
Yeah. If we could minimize talking so everyone can hear the questions, that way we don't have duplicated questions.
All right, great. So we have someone from club hockey?
Yeah, so it's not really, so I have two things. That our coaching, just even cutting it down to 3,600.
Yeah.
Our coaching still was 15% of our operating budget last year. To come up with that additional 400 per semester, it could still be us pinching pennies and trying to cut somewhere else when we're already running almost on fumes because we're trying to keep our dues as low as possible. And our dues were $1,100 last year per member, on top of maxing out funding here as well as our sports.
So this alternative is an attempt to take you being out $1,000 and spread it over every group for coaching. And that's really the best we can do is say, okay, we don't want to give the entire burden of $1,000 to your club. We're going to spread it over all clubs. And I don't know what else we can do.
So in an alternative way, has something been viewed to possibly take a percentage haircut of what every group has spent in their last semester? So
it fluctuates too much.
But to evaluate, or to go off of an average of like the past year, because collectively, like each, or at least I know our organization does the exact routines every school year, not just semester based, but every school year.
Yes.
And then to give a haircut right there. So I just ran the numbers quickly. If you have 250 groups and you cut $125 or $250 per semester from what they were funded, you're saving $125,000 per year.
But that hurts groups that get, like pistol and rifle club. That hurts them more than it hurts Formula SAE.
But then to give them a smaller percentage of it and give the group that gets the 12,000 like us a larger percentage, but to still hit everyone equally, because if you're just hitting $2,000 off the top, that's going to impact us a lot more than
But I think my point is that these cuts kind of screw everyone equally. That's my point.
They do, and so does the next one.
But your cuts are also jeopardizing the competitiveness of our team, as well as other teams here that are that are known nationally.
But if we run out of money, you don't have a coach at all. Like if we run out of
there
money,
are alternative methods to go about this.
Yes, Dustin.
I'd really like to just talk to you. I've kind of just across earlier to talk about the haircut across every group. And I think that's actually something that's going to really limit growth in the organization. I mean, what if you're only 2 semesters in, it's only your first year, you don't know what you want to do. It's not allowing them to fulfill what their mission statement is and fulfill what they want to do. If your new organization doesn't account for that, there's a lot of oddities, and it's hard to say that you could say this organization has a rigid budget, this organization doesn't. It's something that, like we talked about, you can't write the specificity of that language into our funding board documents. That's why I think it's a noble idea. Everyone operated on a similar budget every semester would be great, but it's just too much unpredictability.
As of right now, that's going to just halt the growth of your top organizations here.
So,
and then we can potentially jeopardize just losing the competitiveness and could, at long run, possibly lose our clubs.
Jay?
Hi, I'm Jay. I'm the funding board chair for the next year, and I feel for you. I really do. Competitive teams, we go across the country. We try to, win
He's
trophies.
on the dance team with me.
Right. So I'm on the dance team with Rish, and we try to win trophies for our team, for our school. And we want to be as competitive as possible, with the money that we have. But Rish and Dan have worked extremely hard with trying to manage this budget. They know the budget better than anyone, like the back of their hand. And it's not like we want to make these cuts. It's not that these cuts are because, screw it. But, essentially it's trying to spread those cuts amongst everyone. I understand what you're trying to say, trying to cut everyone from what they have spent previously. But again, even with our group, UConn Thunder Us, it fluctuates. We spend differently based on what we want for that year. Other organizations, yes, it's a rigid system. They have very strict guidelines of what they want to fund. And again, I feel for you and your competitiveness and your drive, but these cuts, I'm sorry, they have to be implemented.
Then these lower organizations, how much are these students contributing out of their own pockets to fund the rest of their expenses? because we fund a pretty substantial amount, and it's probably, it's in the top of the largest club sports.
Again, I'm going to refer back to UConn Thunder Us. You know, I'm part of that organization. Our dues are low, yes, but we pay out of pocket for our travel. We pay out of pocket for, you know, and if this goes into implement, we're going to pay out of pocket for our equipment. You know, and we spend sometimes $1,500 just for our costumes. You know, that's coming out of our, if that's per person. That's coming out of our paycheck. You know, and again, we were trying to limit these cuts as minimal as possible so that we don't affect that competitive drive that everyone has, that everyone wants to, you know, do for those, you know, teams and organizations that we have on campus. But, you know, with the budget that we have, we can only do so much.
So the last thing I want to say to that point is that the alternative is leaving funding as it is, and then 2 years down the road, needing to cut coaching to $1,000 a semester, needing to cut airfare to $150 a semester, needing to cut the max cap to $5,000 a semester. If we wait and push, like kick the can down the road, ice hockey, men's competitive ice hockey is going to be way more screwed than we were if we were to leave this in place for 4 years. If we wait 2 years and delay all these changes, you're going to have to do way bigger changes in the over the next 4 years. And none of us in this room will be here, but we care about our organizations enough to say, I don't want competitive men's ice hockey club to not be able to afford a coach, to go uncoached, to not be able to compete, because you won't be here, right? But, and you know, it sucks that I'm not going to be here at USG next year, but I've made, you know, cuts as much as I can without kind of jeopardizing the complete mission of USG to do our advocacy and funding and everything else. But if we kick the can down the road, groups may start to not exist. I really don't mean to be hyperbolic. I don't think it's hyperbole. Groups won't exist if we wait. Men's ice hockey club won't be able to afford anything. Your dues will be $5,000 if you want to keep doing what you want to do. So this is our attempt to make the cuts as small as possible to stop the bleeding while we can, versus waiting 4 years and saying all these cuts are going to be 10 times worse. And I would prefer this, and I think most people in this room would prefer this, rather than either stopping funding midway through a semester or you know, reducing these caps way more down the road.
So next up on the speakers list, we have Formula SAE in the back.
All right, so yeah, Nick Jagger from Formula SAE. So the big issue I take with this is that
this part,
yeah, the alternative is that you know, for a lot of clubs, I really understand, you know, you have to pay more out of pocket for your coaching staff and stuff like that. But I mean, when you have coaches, right, and this is probably almost everyone else in the room, you're paying for people that they, you know, give you knowledge and tips and experience, and they help you become a better player, and you take that, and that's with you for the rest of your life, right? When I leave the Formula SAE shop, I don't take a tire with me home. Under this, I mean, we'll be having to pay for every tire, nut, bolt, every, you know, piece of steel that we buy. I mean, 99% of the things that we buy are literally just like a hunk of aluminum that we put in 100 hours into machining that into, you know, our wheel and our corner, and I mean, tuning our engine, and that's where I take my issue, because we're putting in ridiculous amounts of hours, and I understand that's not an argument for you, that's an argument for whoever SFAC or whoever is, you know, cutting the funding in general. But I mean, here now we're paying for like raw materials. That'd be like if you went into your lab class and you're like, all right, so this is a $200, you know, piece of like lab equipment, and you have to buy that so you can run this lab. Like that's ridiculous. I mean,
so I don't want this to seem that it's only going to affect the sports teams. This is contractual, so this means any contractual service. For example, we have, you know, I think it's American Red Cross that has people come in and CPR train their students. That's a contractual service that's going to be affected. There's other contractual services that are affected by this. It's not just
the other thing is, so when people in this room have suggested, let's spread the wealth, this is an attempt to do this. And your point is, or taking your point is, someone's going to be pissed.
No, but this isn't spreading the wealth, because no one's going to join Formula if they say, hey, you gotta pay for that piece of material that you're going to put on the car, and you're gonna work your ass off for it, but you'll never.
But
you're not gonna,
people
like,
in
get
this
that
room 20 minutes ago were saying, if we do percentage cuts, it'll be fair because now everyone's taking a hit. And so if you do that, the real implication, I'm agreeing with you, the real implication is that someone's gonna be pissed off. Maybe Club Sports is like, wow, this is great. Now Formula SAE, now 3D Printing Club, they're screwed.
Okay, but this is okay. So I guess my point, in, like at whole, is not. It's not someone's gonna be pissed off, right? I understand the $2,000, 12 to 10, right? That's a big change. And to be honest, yeah, Formula will be able to survive off of 10 grand. There is a bottom limit, like 5 grand, we physically wouldn't be able to fully cover. But that extra 2 grand, fine, we can take it. We'll share that hit very. We can go through with that. But if you're saying that people have to start putting in money for the things that we buy through USG, I mean, every single person in our club already we put up money for our club, and it's those last minute things that you guys talk about. When we already run through our 12 grand, we say, oh shit, the bolts that we bought aren't to size, or we forgot injector connectors, we forgot all this other shit that happens, and we're taking that as it is. That's fine. But now you're saying that things like, hey man, we need 4 tires to run our car this year. No shit. Everyone in this club is you're gonna have to put up $12 for those 4 tires that you don't even get to race. I mean, this is like raw materials. This is it's not. You're not saying that like, hey, you're gonna have to take this equally like everyone else. It's that no one's gonna join a club where you have to put in ridiculous amounts of money and then put in ridiculous amounts of hours.
I understand. I'm part of a North Indian dance team. Like, who in here is going to join that if they have to pay out of pocket for it, It's just, the question is, where else do we find $39,000?
So,
the bottom line
you either cut coaching to 3,000 or you do this. And my point earlier was, you're going to be pissed off for this, men's crew's going to be pissed off for this. Someone's going to be pissed off, so what do? Because everyone just raised their hand, every club sport just raised their hand and said they prefer this, but then the groups that request $12,000 in category B are going to be pissed about this. And so I'm trying to figure out,
this was our how.
What do we do?
Yeah, this was our
How do we save $40,000 with category B or coaching? Is one or the other? My point is that when everyone's happy about this alternative until someone says, oh wait, I'm screwed out of all this money because for a car I never can get in. I feel your pain, like I get what you're saying, I'm agreeing with you, but someone's gonna be upset. So do you think we should do the coaching?
I mean, from my perspective,
yes.
Right? Obviously.
Well, your point was that they can take something from it.
Yeah, you get something from that. And this is, we're purely, essentially an academic club. Right. We're not.
And there's other groups like you too, 3D Printing Club and some others that 100% of everything you do is category B.
Yeah.
But these are.
But if we lose more of our money, we're not just losing coaching money, we're gonna impact our player safety because we can't purchase player equipment to practice healthy tackling techniques.
Well,
And so
we just won't have a car.
And I understand we all appreciate everything, but by doing this coaching cap, it's specifically targeting the club sports, just like the fraternity thing was specifically targeting interfraternity funding. So I think by spreading the wealth on the alternative, we're all kind of hurt, we're all kind of impacted, we're all kind of pissed. But it's, you're not targeting one specific thing. And if you keep that precedent saying, okay, we're not going to target just the frats, we're not going to target just the club sports. We're going to everyone's going to be hurt by it. So that's why.
I have a potential solution for this, so I just want to voice it and hear you guys' thoughts. So what if we did both? Cut the coaching cap to $3,500, $500 and 95%. Hit them both. I don't think those numbers are exact. I think.
Well, does the other 5%? Probably
Again,
going to want to hear this. Does the 5%?
The math would have to be worked out. Yeah, that's still going to have to come out of your pocket. But
And if you do that, you're then saying you're eligible for $3,500, but only 95% of that, because then it's both. If you do a percentage and a cap, you're getting both combined. So really, it's the same.
How exactly does the coaching funding cap work? Does the coaching money come out of the $10,000 that they get?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So if they request a coach for $4,000, they only have $6,000 for all other things, travel.
I don't exactly understand how capping their coaching money gives you guys more money, because they still have $10,000 to use in a way, right?
I suppose, but
I don't see how it decreases your budget. Because okay, so contractual services is a group is not entitled to all 12,000 or 10,000. They're entitled to 10,000 as they abide by the policy. So say a group only uses contractual, which is one of our highest expenditures. A lot of groups ask for contractual services. They can only get $10,000 if they can justify up to $10,000 of contractual services. So it's not groups and the expenditure that's going towards contractual. That number is what's going to be capped. So if you look back at the SBAC budget, right? And I find contractual. This is the amount that's being spent. That's being spent on contractual services right now. So we're trying to see what numbers contractual at, catering, those are the numbers that we're looking at from here. And based on those expenditures, we're pulling it back to see what in our budget can be used to reduce that number. So because contractual services is so high and it's a category B in our policies, we're trying to restrict or we're trying to reduce the amount of category B service or category B funding so that we can reduce this contractual number. Because we only tried to hit and reduce the numbers that we saw were the highest. Does that make sense?
So, do you have some?
Yeah. So, in this proposed coaching cut, we're cutting it from 4,000 to 3,000. We'd save 39, right? Or you guys would save 39. And then this one you'd save 41, right? So, what? Okay, so my question is, doing this percentage cut, I don't mean to go backwards, but it seems like it saved more money. And in the previous one, it's just like a $2,000 cut to save the money. If we did like a percentage cut where we were able, like what Stephen on Crew was proposing, where we did a 10% cut to what the people's previous year's funding has been, couldn't we save more than 60,000? Was it? I don't know. I mean, we're like every club that's come here is coming here as individuals, and obviously we want to be treated as individuals, and these cuts are kind of not treating us as individuals because there is that list as you guys posted that shows that some teams and clubs are getting almost more screwed than others. Like the Pistol and Rifles Club said they only spend close to $2,500.
But if you do this, they're then proportionally, in my opinion, getting screwed as much as everyone else. They're only spending $2,500.
I'm not. I mean, obviously, everybody that leaves here is going to be angry because we are all getting funded cut. It's like nobody's going to be happy. These cuts have to happen in order for the future of all of our teams to persist. So I'm just asking if whoever's considering these cuts can look at all of these cuts in this light.
Yes, and your point to, like, I'm trying. If we did 10% cut to last year's budget, most groups don't have such consistent budgets as Formula SE, as Men's Crew. Most of them could vary so drastically that if you cap them at 10% of what they got last semester, they may be the most screwed group out of everybody. So just because you don't know what you're going to be able to do, you don't know what competitions you're getting into, and it fluctuates year to year. You know, if we cut Thunder Ross 10% of what they got this year, but they don't get into competition next year, we're not saving anything. But there's some group that makes it to nationals, and we cut 10% of their budget because they didn't of a budget where they didn't get to nationals. Well, then they can't go to nationals. So this, in my mind, is a little more equitable and a little more, I can then more easily project how much we're saving, whereas in the instance you just gave, I have no idea how much we're saving. I have no idea how much we're saving. Because, and then groups are going to appeal and say, well, we didn't, our budget last year, we didn't have a national competition, but this year we do, and then that's not fair. Then we start spending money outside the policies, and it just starts getting really confusing. This way we can, and not just this cut, but all the cuts, these cuts, we can pretty accurately determine how much we're going to save, and kind of understand how groups are going to be hurt. In your suggestion, it's just harder to predict that and project for the next year what we're going to spend.
We have about 6 people on this list, 6, 7 actually.
Can you raise your hand if you're on the speakers list and it's relevant?
Are these comments really different than what we've been saying?
Yes. Sort of. All right, so I'll go down the list. Okay, so
just try to make your comments as quick as possible, and we'll do the same.
Yeah, you're next.
I'm not gonna bitch and moan here. I'm just curious about how much club sports specifically would be impacted by the 10% cut.
Well, we could reverse engineer this a little bit.
Because I know you get a certain allocation from club sports, but also.
So I have a meeting at the beginning of the year. Comptroller has a meeting with the club sports at the beginning of the year to kind of figure out what we're willing to pay for versus what they're willing to pay for, and then it's like a negotiation almost between us. Based on that, we've gotten different amounts of requests from club sports. So if club sports decides that they have more in their budget to be able to give, we often get less requests for supplies and equipment. That's something that we can look up, and if you give us your contact information, we can get you those numbers.
I'm just interested because I want to be able to make sure we're not impacting player safety by losing more money.
No,
I don't want to have anyone break something because we can't teach them healthy tackling.
So you're good? Next one was good. So swinging blues. Your question was answered. So someone in the back.
Hi. Yeah, I just have a question.
What group are you in?
Just kind of gears,
okay.
Not in USG yet, but just getting into.
I wasn't sure. I know you're in USG a lot.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure if you were in a club.
Not officially, yeah. So I was just wondering if the deficit was based off if each organization were to take out 10,000. Is this based off everybody going into their resources?
No, the deficit is based on, so because each group kind of requests a different amount and gets a different amount each semester, but when you take it as a whole, it's generally the same amount, and every year we spend slightly more each year. What we did, what we did to get to a $500,000 deficit is say, this is how much we spent this year. If we spend exactly the same, which rarely happens, we rarely spend the same or less. If we spend the same the next 2 years, compound those, how much out are we going to be? And it's $500,000.
Okay. I guess just my only question would be then, if we could, because I know a lot of people have brought up tiering it, and you said that it's super variable, and some people but if we can generalize enough to make as big of a thing as this is our deficit, how come we can't just generalize it to, and I mean, I know it's a work in progress, a tier system, it's gonna be a lot of work, but if it means the money is going where it should be, why aren't we kind of working towards that?
So my main point to that would be that legislating and fiscal projections are done very differently. So when you're saying, how screwed are we going to be in the next 2 years? The easiest way to do it, to generalize it, what you can do, is to say, let's keep spending the same and see how screwed we are. We actually know it's probably going to be slightly worse than that because we spend more every year. When you're legislating, which is I don't mean legislating it's kind of a weird word, but when you're making policy, when you're saying, let's make a tiered policy, and you want to generalize, just because we generalized our budget doesn't mean we can generalize policy, because then there's implications that you might not see. If you do a tiered system that's too general, then who's in which tier, or can they then appeal based on which category they're in because they don't think they're in the right category. It's easier to generalize fiscally than it is to just make a general policy, because then you might be screwing something over.
It's quantitative versus qualitative, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we are looking at it quantitatively because that's my job, to look at the numbers. Qualitatively, the reason to do a tiered system is that groups that are spending these like same amounts of money don't get screwed over, and so on and so forth. So if we were to look at this and try to write up a piece of legislation, how can we categorize these groups? Formula SAE, my dance team, another cultural organization, a sorority. How can we write a policy that encompasses all these groups fairly, and how can we do it so it restricts it to only these groups?
See, like, and I honestly, like, this is just purely out of curiosity. I'm not trying to be like combative or whatever.
No, yeah.
I just feel like if you're consistently, I know it's not super consistently, but like asking for like a certain amount of money, like you could easily tier someone, like these like groups here would be tiered at like 11,000, 12,000 versus like a sorority that's like asking for 5,000.
But then you're not saving money. So if you tier these groups can justify $12,000. If you cap just these groups at $12,000, you're not saving money.
But then when you cut, it's across the board.
Yeah, but like we've been saying, like with these cuts, Formula SAE is being screwed by this, but not by, by this. So percentage cuts sound really great in practice, but in reality, like groups that then pay that percentage are going to be mad too.
But Formula SAE, I would assume, has a budget higher than $10,000. So if you request for some more than that amount of money, 90% will still be that 10,000. So you can still get max money from USG.
No. So it's no.
Unless it's a capital expense.
Wait, can you say that again?
If it's not a capital expense.
But that's all they have is capital expenses.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
was his point, was that, they exclusively, they don't get speakers, they don't have on-campus events, they exclusively exist in category B.
But we get screwed by it too, club sports is in category B.
Yeah, definitely,
So
yeah.
it's not just.
Everyone, like I said, everyone's getting screwed. When men's crew requests an org, now with this policy, I don't know how much an org costs, but you're now on the hook for 10% of that.
What you just said is that SAE is going to get screwed on the 12 to 10, and then also by this category B, but we're getting screwed just the same way. There's no justification of that.
No, I think
well, my point was that to her point, was that if you take this group and say, all right, we're going to cap these at 12,000, you're not saving money. And the point is we have to get to $250,000 in a given year, and there's only so many policies that allow us to save money. There's only 5 of them, and one of them is completely out of our control and only saves $1,200. So we have 4 policies, airfare, category C, coaching, and max cap, where we can actually save money from. And again, funding board is 2/3 of our budget. So obviously most of the savings when we need to get to $250,000 is going to come from funding board, especially when more than half of the other third of the budget is fixed costs.
I'm just looking, you brought up economics terms, and I'm just looking for the least amount of marginal cost, and it's very difficult, but I think if you take just the coaching cap, the quality of a lot of the organizations will go down because we'll have to pick up, graduates.
And that's why I proposed this as an alternative, because then you're only out $400, but if, what group are you in, men's rugby?
Men's rugby.
If you need to buy balls, now you're on the hook for 10%. It's not just like you get $600 back here. Like you do. But then maybe you end up paying more than $600 because of this 10% cut. I don't know. I don't know what you buy.
All of our the quality of our organization is going to go down by the alternative plan, as opposed to really hurting the quality of these coaches if we just do the coaching cap.
But
that's what I'm
to your point, the 10% would really hurt us because
the quality of their organization.
The quality of
we had the same debate.
But we're hurt as well.
Yeah, and I think
we're all hurt, but I mean,
Who's
the
hurt more?
purely coaching cap screws you guys a lot. the 10% thing will screw us a ton.
Well,
But
so if
obviously,
we're all gonna bleed here, then why not, like, if the teams or the organizations that can most funding, then why don't we bleed a certain percentage?
Yeah.
And like
because
slowly work the
it's
tax
different for
rate
us
down.
than for you guys. Because I'm worried that with this 10%, that
No,
my
so-
organization,
no, I just-
2 or 3 years down the line, just won't exist.
But we're worried you're gonna have
So
someone
I'm not saying
die
just
or
a
get hurt
10%,
from not
just
having
in, like,
these
category
proper
B. I'm
coaches.
saying, so if, so say
You wanna
we
take it
stay,
that seriously.
stay at 2, or at 12,000, and like, start off with like 10%, there's a haircut of 10% from us in the top bracket. Then like, we move down to the next bracket and it's a lower percentage, just like taxes. Just work our way down. Has something like that been explored, and how many options have been explored in this?
A lot of options have been explored. A tier system has been explored. Like I said, in a number of ways. Is it based on how much you're requesting? Is it based on the number of people you have in your group? Is it based on dues? We determined when we were coming up with these that those end up hurting groups more than this. This, in my opinion, and I'm being honest here, like I'm trying to screw as few people as possible. This, in my opinion, I think Rich will agree with me, that this hurts groups the least. That's my opinion. I think that's Rich's opinion. Otherwise, we wouldn't have proposed this. If we didn't think that this hurts groups the least.
But you're not answering the initial thing that I just asked.
Which was?
Have you guys thought about a whole tax bracket system where your the organizations getting the most funding get hit with like a certain amount of percentage, and that percentage goes down the lower amount of funding that each organization.
So you could look at it like, okay, groups that are requesting 12,000 get hit with a 20% cut.
Something like that, but not 20. So say 10, because 20 would just put us lower than this.
Okay, so then you go down from 10, and then Pistol and Rifle Club, which only spends $2,500, is only getting hit with a 2% cut. We're not anywhere near $250,000. So if you're going to do a tiered thing, you have the top has to be bigger than 10%. Because if you're getting $12,000, 10% is only $1,200. We only have 33 groups. Oops. We only have 33 groups listed here. That would only be $1,000 a group. That's only 35 grand. So, and then you're only going down from there with a smaller budget and a smaller percentage. What was that?
They're already spending that amount, so I'm just.
Right, but I'm saying, if you were to do a percentage cut, like I'm saying, like go down with percentage, you have to be bigger than 10%, otherwise you're not going to reach 25,
Right.
$250,000.
Cumulatively, we want to, for this particular cap, cumulatively,
No, but even if you got rid of, cumulatively, even if you got rid of these and said, let's not do any specific cuts, let's just do percentage cuts for every group based on the amount they request.
Absolutely.
If you do that, your group is going to have to take at least, this is my estimation, just thinking about it in my head, a 20% cut. Because if you only take a 10% cut like you suggested, that's only going to be $1,000.
Well,
Or no, $1,200. Yeah, $1,200 times only 6 groups got $12,000. So that's 1,200 times 6. Then if you do, let's say, just for the sake of easy math, the rest of these groups got an average of 10,000, which is not true. Well, no, because some of these groups get 11,000.
Well, so are the resources out there to determine if something like this could work in the next few days?
Yeah, but I'm just saying, based on the way I'm thinking about it right now, like I think, in my mind, said that a 10% cut wouldn't happen. It wouldn't work.
But you can easily model something out just roughly.
But anything more than 10%, or anything more than 15% maybe. If we go to 20% for your group, you're then out $2,400, which is more or the same as what we're proposing right now.
Yes. So somewhere 17%,
But then,
working way down.
But then when you get smaller amounts of money and lower percentages, you're then saving less money.
Can they get reconciled at the bottom though? So you are still cutting the little organizations. Kind of reconcile itself by cutting the top brackets.
No, well, if you're at 15% for the top groups,
you still don't hit 60,000.
you're not going to hit 250,000. You're not even going to get close. If for Pistol Rifle Club, which is one of the smallest groups that gets the least amount of funding, you're saying that most we can cut from the biggest group is 15%. We're going to end up around where 5% for Pistol Rifle Club. What's 5% of 20? That's like $150. You're nowhere close. You're not even remotely close.
Well, then how much are they going to get hit right now?
If we did this one, let's assume that Pistol Rifle Club gets, well, we can't even fund most
This
of their
semester,
categories.
we only got $743. The way our club operates,
We can't
firearms,
fund
ammunition,
we can't fund those things.
So we're all.
So maybe they're not a good example. But a group that gets $2,500 of things that we're allowed to buy, they're going to get screwed out of $250 if we go with this. If everything they request is category B. Most groups aren't like that, but even so, that's going to be a bigger cut and save USG more money and get us closer to $250,000 than a tiered bracket system. I like the idea. I think it makes sense, like philosophically.
Why not run something like that real quick?
I mean, I can get you numbers. I can provide that. Yeah, and I'll do that tomorrow. I'm just saying we won't get to 250,000, but I can show. Can you give me your email after this and I can send it out to you? Yeah.
All right. So next person on the list, Mr. Gentleman with the green shirt. Do you still want to be on the list, or do you? No. You're good. Okay. All right. Great. Someone with a Hasby. What is it? Yes. Go ahead.
So I'm from Ballroom. I have a couple of points. I super fear the tier system because when it was implemented in club sports, it you know, you can only make categories for a certain amount of things, and we found in club sports that their tier system did not encompass what our club did. So we ended up having to withdraw from club sports as a result, and I fear that we're going to lose organizations in the tier system because so many of our organizations are so unique. Also, in terms of the alternative plan versus cutting coaching, so for us, I feel their pain. I understand, like, you know, they're getting hit across the board with the 90%, but conversely, we would be basically losing our coaches with just a flat cap on coaching, and our club was in.
I think she's talking about the tier system, which affects all groups. So if you need to side chatter, please keep it low because I know this is something that affects everyone. So I just want to give her that respect.
So our club lives and dies based on whether we have coaches. If we don't have coaches, we can't attract people because we would just have a student running our, you know, preparation for competition and our regular club activities. So, like, you know, we're on the opposite side of the spectrum from you. So, like, I understand. I do. But at the same time, like, it can't encompass everything. And we will still be taking a hit on the category B expenses, and we will be taking hits other places. So, just in terms of that.
Who's next on the list? Next on the list, someone from FSA.
One of the main issues that you guys brought up is that there's so many more organizations coming in and asking for money and that kind of thing. Is there any vetting process for the organizations that come in, or can anyone just come and request?
No. So the vetting process isn't done by us. It's done by student activities. So I started a group 2 semesters ago. You have to make a constitution, you have to have minutes, you have to have a legit mission statement. They check to make sure that you have a mission. We also, like my club wouldn't have been, it was a political organization, wouldn't have really been eligible for funding because we can't spend money on politics and stuff like that. But most of the vetting, a group can only become an official tier 2 group if they've proven to student activities that they're legitimate, they have a mission statement, all those things.
We're regulated by SABO and the business card.
No, SABO and student activities.
That's what
So they do that kind of vetting process, and by the time they get to us, we say our vetting process is, I have it here. One of the non-financial changes we're making is a 15-week eligibility period. I can talk about that later, or I can talk about it now. This is, if you start in one semester, the second week of one semester, you're not eligible for funding until the second week of the next semester. We tried 2 other iterations of this. We tried saying, okay, you have to exist for a full semester. This is actually the biggest cut we're making, is non-coaching related things. So if you, do we buy your skates for you, things like that? Or what do we buy? What kind of, sorry.
Well,
yeah, so what do we buy for you?
Well, we pay travel. Well, you pay travel for rental for like ice facilities and coaching.
Do you fly?
No.
Okay, so you're on every travel expenditure,
Yes.
You're now down to 65% instead of 75%.
But will the remaining, what is that, like 35%, is that still coming out of our like capped budget? Like, you know, like right now it's $12,000, but like if I request $1,000 for a hotel room, I only get 75% of that,
Yeah.
but like the 25%
That doesn't count towards your cap.
Okay.
Every group can get
Because it does right now.
You can get
No.
You can get 100% of $10,000, but that means your group is spending whatever difference that is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if we spend, if you request $10,000, just say in travel, just as a hypothetical, and you get funded at 65% of that, you still have $3,500 left to spend.
So you're allowed up to $12,000, which means that if you, within the policies, request all category C, D, and E, which is like your travel and your lodging and all of that, and registration fees, that kind of thing. If you request $16,000 worth of those requests, you will get up to $12,000 because 75% of 16,000 is 12,000. You're allowed right now up to 12,000. So like, in the same manner.
So our point is that you could say, let's get a $1,000 cut somewhere else on travel. Well, then you're going to be double cut on travel because you're already going down to 65%. And if you decide to fly somewhere, just in the future as a hypothetical, you're going to be cut down to $300 a ticket. You're going to get hit somewhere else regardless. Unless everything you're doing is coaching or category B, you're going to get hit somewhere else too.
All right, last one. Yeah.
So on the alternative, I think it makes absolutely no sense to go with the alternative because if you are a club sport, right, the vast majority of your expenditures go into category B, equipment, coaching, or travel, which is category C. Category C is taking a 10% hit already, right? Category B, under the alternative, will take a 10% hit also, right? So your entire budget is taking a 10% hit, which means the maximum you can get funded at is $9,000 out of the $10,000, which means there's a $1,000 hole in your budget anyway, right? Which is the exact same that you get when you have a coaching cap. If you have a coaching cap, only teams get it does, and here's why. If you request $10,000, right, and you only pay or you only get 90% of that, then you get $9,000, and there's $1,000 that is not covered by USG, right? Now, on the other hand, you keep the coaching cap. So all club sports take the same $1,000 hit, but teams like Formula SAE or groups that request primarily category B expenses don't get hit. And USG obtains roughly a similar level of spending cuts, right? So the question with the alternative in the coaching cap is, do we want club sports to be the only groups that take a $1,000 hit in category B, or do we want all groups, all across the board, to take a up to $1,000 cut?
The answer to that depends on who you're asking. Club sports is going to say, hell no, we don't want to do the coaching cap.
My argument is it doesn't matter to club sports because they're going to take a $1,000 cut anyway.
But if we keep the precedent of not hurting just the fraternities, just keep that precedent, we already got the ball over the bat.
The precedent with fraternities is different. When we cut fraternity spending, there was a line that literally said, we will not fund Greek organizations. If there was a line in here that said, we will not fund club sports, you would have that precedent to argue on. But we don't have that here.
We already have specific policy outlining coaches, and the only thing we're changing is the number. So to that point, I'd have to disagree with you, only because the policy already kind of exists in your, we're already sort of discriminating against club sports in a way because we could get rid of that line, and you could request up to $10,000. You could request as much as you want for coaching. But our point is that we're trying to control costs, and we've done that however many years ago. It's been this way since I've been here, by setting coaching at $4,000, a separate cap. We don't have to have that. We could set no cap, and then you could request $10,000 for coaching. But USG, however many years ago, decided that wasn't a good idea. But that's been the way it's been since I've been here.
Are there any questions on what I just said?
So in terms of the coaching cap, so if we're going to be taking $1,000 hit no matter what happens, and I think other club sports might agree with me, I would prefer to be able to control where we lose that money, because if we have to lose that money in coaching, then we're paying extra out of pocket for coaches.
Well, you're paying extra out of pocket anyway. You're paying $1,000 for something. In the coaching cuts, you're paying for the coach. But if you're not taking a coaching cut, you're paying 10% of every other expense. So you're still out $1,000. It's on paper where it comes from that changes here.
Well, realistically, we're out 3,000, so I guess.
Well, right, because the 2,000 off the top, yeah.
Is there someone else?
No, this is the end of the speakers list.
Okay, so Ben can go next, but I just want to say we've had 2 slides in 2 hours, so we're on a pretty steady pace. But I think we should move on to the next slide after Ben. But if anyone else has any comments, I'm not going to stop you from.
So I have a question. So with, for example, the coaching cap. So if you cut coaching down to $3,000, so right now, if a group has $12,000, they're allowed to spend $4,000 of it on a coach. If you cut that down to $3,000, can they spend that extra $1,000 on equipment or something?
Technically, yes.
So,
but they're going to have a hard time. I think in my mind, funding board is going to be smart enough to say, okay, last year you spent $4,000 on a coach. You didn't need this extra $100 in widgets. I don't know why I keep saying that, but widgets. Really justify this to us. Why do you need this extra $1,000? It's my opinion that most groups aren't going to be maybe deceitful isn't the right word, aren't going to take advantage of the policies to that point where you then end up spending that $1,000 anyway. You know what I'm saying? And if you leave the $12,000 cap, that problem then becomes worse. You know, because then it's $3,000 that they end up being able to spend. So the $12,000 cap lowering to 10 kind of helps with that problem. But also, I just don't think of the 40 groups that have coaches, they're going to spend that extra $1,000 on something they wouldn't have otherwise spent it on. Especially if we have, if we did something like Dustin said, where we do a combo of both, then they're out, you know, some amount of money for everything they spend anyway.
but for like club hockey, you pay $1,100 out of pocket to a group every year, so they clearly have another $1,000 of expenses that USG could pay. So I'm just not sure how much of the $1,000 per organization that uses a coach USG would actually see in savings. That's
Mike,
just,
would you continue on that? Like,
would you get
we collect dues that are about $1,000 every year, and we have expenses obviously that are way higher than $12,000 per semester. To that point, I mean, if you cap our coaching at $3,000, we would still hit that $10,000 limit. We would just shift the allocation to spend one. So I'm just not sure
I see
how
your
this
point,
saves you money.
and that's why once I talked with the last year's funding board chair, I've actually begun to prefer this option, not because I have anything against Formula SAE, but I have a responsibility. I really don't. I love your group. I signed all your stuff.
It makes sense.
This is actually more beneficial for USG. And not only do Rich and I have a responsibility to funding all these groups, we have a responsibility to make sure USG stays solvent. And I think this, and it's not about saving $2,000 more because that's a negligible amount of money. It's about us being able to guarantee that we'll actually save that money. So to Ben's point, yes, you're right. I don't think it would be a huge problem, but that's why I'm in favor of this one, because you can guarantee you're going to save the money. We won't release a purchase order for coaching until you give us that money, the $400 that you would then owe for a $4,000 coach. Can we move on to the next slide? Okay. So category C, which was previously C, D, and E. Some of you were here at Senate last week. We fund C, D currently. We fund all of these at 75%. There are slight distinctions between each of these categories, but we fund them all the same. So we want to kind of clear up the policies a little bit and just combine them into one and find what they have in common. The one thing they have in common is that they restrict participation in some way. So now category C is going to be any event that restricts participation, whether it's on campus, off campus, or wherever. If you're saying only this group can come, only 16 members of our group can go to this competition, you're going to be you would be funded at 65% now. This number, like I said here, was the policy up until 2014 when our Senate realized, oh crap, we have an $800,000 surplus, which is going up every year, which is not responsible. Let's give that money back. Now we've reached the point where we're at zero, and now we have to kind of go back to that original policy because that's when we started to build up some of that surplus. I don't think we're going to build up a surplus only because we have more groups and more requests. So I think this policy will help keep us at 0.
What were C, D, and E again? I'm sorry.
So C was on campus closed, D was off campus closed, and E was
Off campus and closed.
yeah, and then there's some small distinction between these.
It didn't need the C, D, and E didn't need
to be split.
C, D, and E.
Yeah, the one thing they have in
That's
common is that they
essentially-
restrict participation. So we eliminated like 4 paragraphs of a policy that is completely useless and just made category C, which is going to be any event that's restricted participation-wise, regardless of location. It doesn't make sense to say like on campus, off campus, closed, because they're funded at the same amount. So just make it closed. So that's why we did this. Saves us about $71,000 a year. This is actually the biggest cut that we're making. It's about 28% of our deficit. But again, this is the policy that we had before we had the huge surplus. We now have to go back to the original one. I think this is actually the policy, and correct me if I'm wrong, that has the least amount of people upset, just because it hurts most people equally, and this is what the policy used to be. But tell me if you guys are upset. I'm sure you're all upset about it. I'm upset about it. I don't want to make people pay more for their airfare, pay more for their, whatever they're requesting, more for their off-campus events. But I think this was a really nice 3-year period, 3.5 year period of funding at 75% to give money back to students. But now that's kind of gone away. Does anybody have any comments on this particular section? Okay. All right, second to last one is the airfare cap. Currently, we fund at 350%. Now, keep in mind, $350. If you request a $100 airfare ticket, we'll give you $350. We fund $350 max. Now, keep in mind we only fund 75%. So we do a cap, then a cut. So if you request a $400 airline ticket, we're going to cut you down to $350 and then do a 75% cut. It's not a 75% cut first and then we bring you down to $350 if that's still above $350. It's the cap and then the percentage cut. So just keep that in mind. When we lower it to $300, we save approximately $37.50 a ticket. To be able to travel to anywhere in the United States or Canada, I don't think that's a huge extra burden on students, especially when it can save us $15,000, which is $15,000 more dollars we're not cutting from category B or coaches or anything else, or the cap. So if we didn't have this, we may have to lower the $10,000 cap to $9.5 or something like that.
So, and like I mentioned before, what Dan and I tried to do, the reason that these are the policies that are being targeted is because we looked at our expenses and we looked at where we were spending the most. So like I showed you, for contractual, we were spending a ton of money. So then we pulled it back to our policies and said, how can we lower the spending for contractuals by cutting category B. What is the biggest contractual expense? Coaching. That's how we arrived at cutting these specific 4 or 5, whatever Dan mentioned, policies in this big of a manner.
Also, there's not many other policies that you can cut. I'm trying to think of another one.
Like hotels.
Hotels, but we already capped that at $150. It's really hard pressed to find a good hotel that doesn't have bed bugs for less than $150.
Right, and so, yeah, I don't think anyone's upset about it, so I'm not going to go.
Is anyone super upset about this? Okay. This one we have no control over. The state government sets the rate at which state actors can be reimbursed for gas. When you all go on a trip using a car, you're a state actor in that the money being used to pay for your gas is state money. We can only reimburse you per mile what the state government tells us we can. That was last year, it was 57.5 cents per mile. The government has now lowered that to 53.5 cents per mile. That's not an option. It's not debatable. This saves us $1,200 a year, which is like negligible. It saves us 0.5% of our deficit, but it's something. But yeah, that's not really negotiable. Dan Malloy sets that. So these are some of the non-financial changes. And then the last slide we have is going more into our USG non-funding board changes. Yeah, just go through.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that only undergrads are attending the events because we only take money from undergrads in our pool of money. So this used to say majority, which is half plus one. We wanted to make that a tighter restriction. So now 75% of the members of that group have to be undergraduates. 15 academic weeks Dan talked about before. That 15 academic weeks is the length of a full semester, academic semester, which is why we chose 15 weeks. No fundraising events. So right now, what it says in the policy is if we fund you $100 and you use it as a charity event and you make $150, if you give us our portion back of what we funded you, $100, you can keep the $50 difference. What we've seen happen, and the reason that we are very strict about this is because oftentimes on campus you can't raise as much money as you're spending on the event, especially if it's done through USG. We've had people ask for like bouncy houses and this and that, and they never, the return on that investment is never.
So what ends up happening is USG, if we give you $1,000 to start a fundraiser and you only raise $500, USG is then out $500 and the group gets nothing. So we found that the majority of cases were that we're not saving a ton of money. It just it's not even worth really putting it into the deficit because we don't get too many fundraisers. But it's hard to justify a fundraiser when most aren't making money and we just lose out on money.
The 3 quotes, that's something that the business office asks for. If cumulative your request is over $1,000, or if each individual item of your request is over $100, we ask for 3 quotes just to make sure we're spending on the least expensive item. Catering will be prorated. Right now we do that anyways. When we send out purchase order to groups, we make them sign or swipe or whatever to keep track of the number that undergrads that attend the event, and we only pay for the number of undergrads that attend.
If you get a catering purchase order, you'll see there's like a sentence right under all the event information and the amount we're giving that says this will only be paid out for the number of undergrads that attend. You get $1,000 in catering for $10 a person and only 50 people show up. We're only giving half that purchase order to catering. Catering is then responsible to get the other half from you.
Incomplete requests, so what we've seen this semester is that...
Skip 12-member cap.
Oh, 12-member cap. It was 8 last year. It got pushed up to 16. We're bringing it back down to 12. We found this is fair. Most groups only need 12 members to attend. The exception to this rule is if there's active participation in somewhere. If you're going, for example, sports teams, and you have more than 12 people competing, you have more than 12 people actively engaging in the event, then funding board takes a look at your reason and.
This only affects groups that are going to a conference and just sitting there and listening. Instead of 16, now they can only send 12.
Yeah. Incomplete requests. So what we saw was that groups were not getting information from vendors soon enough, or competitions or things like that, and they were missing that 6-week deadline because they didn't have the information that they needed. So in order to kind of go around that and for them to be able to submit a request to funding board that is incomplete because they don't have full information from the vendor, we wanted to make sure that that's not why they were missing their deadline. Funding board, like I said, reviews that, follows up with the group, and gets the information once the group has information. Outlining what may be reimbursed. Oh, do you have
Yeah, so SABO already has this policy, but our goal with some of these is to kind of take SABO policy and put them in ours, so you only have to look one place. But SABO says there's only 3 reasons why you should be able to be reimbursed. One would be if the thing you're buying, the supply you're buying, has a useful life of under 1 year, you can be reimbursed. So if you're buying, like Dramatic Pause, they're buying something for their set and it's going to break within a year or doesn't have a useful life of a year, you can then be reimbursed for that. You can pay out of pocket for that and we'll give you money. We can give you a reimbursement for a registration for an event if that registration doesn't give you a service provided. So we can reimburse you for a museum ticket, we can reimburse you for a production that you want to go see with your club. But if you're going to, if your registration is to go to a racetrack and you get a printout of your summary of how fast you went and how quick you went, all that stuff, there's a service being provided, we have to pay directly for that. And the last one, is airfare, any kind of travel. So your gas, we don't give you money in advance for gas. You have to be reimbursed for that. Your airfare, it's actually beneficial to both the group and to us if you buy your airfare before you get funding board approval, because the earlier you buy your tickets, the more you save. So we say go ahead and buy your airfare tickets and we'll reimburse you. Those are the only 3 reasons why people should be reimbursed. Every other thing has to be paid directly by USG because the state has tax obligations to to figure to keep track of where people's taxes are going.
Yeah, and also that helps us control where the money is being spent.
Yep. The last three are President, Comptroller veto, and Funding Board override. Currently, the President has veto power over funding, over USG legislation, and as the COO of the organization and as the CFO of the organization, we both have fiduciary responsibilities to our budget. And not being able to question or be against a funding board decision leaves our hands tied when we get a purchase order that we don't think should be funded because we think it breaks the policies. What this does is says if funding board thinks something is a networking, doesn't think something is a networking event and approves it, and I as president see the word networking, or I think that it's networking even if they didn't explicitly say it, I'm allowed to veto that and say that group can't get funding. The funding board can then override that vote, and if the funding board is unsuccessful in overriding that vote, the group may still appeal if they think the president or the comptroller has made an error in terms of misinterpreting the policies, or if the president discriminated because of they don't think that this group should exist, or that they don't think the race of the group. Whatever. So that's a new change. Currently, it actually says the comptroller has the right kind of to veto based on state law and university policies, but it's not the comptroller's job to interpret state law. We don't have the knowledge to do that, so we just change it to a broad veto. Info regarding appeals process must be sent with any funding denial. Currently, when you get denied funding for a specific request or all your requests or whatever it may be for whatever reason, you don't get any information about how to appeal that decision. And we have an appeals process. So we want to make sure that we're sending out how we appeal, how the appeal process works, so that any group that thinks that they were wrongly denied may appeal that to the comptroller, chief justice, and one other justice. But then we clarified what grounds for appeals are. It's misinterpretation of the policy, discrimination, and procedural error.
On behalf of?
On USG's part. People think, currently the way our policies read means that groups think that they can appeal a USG decision based on the group's misinterpretation of policies. But in law and in any kind of appeals board, ignorance to policy is not a right, does not give you the right to appeal. So we clarified that if you think USG misinterpreted the policies, if you think USG had a procedural error, then you may appeal. It's not, oh, I screwed up, hey, can I have an appeal? No, you missed the deadline, so you're denied. Otherwise, we're gonna have every group appealing for everyone. So those are the non-financial changes. Does anybody have any questions on these changes? Yes?
When are they effective?
They would be effective as soon as Senate approves them and the President signs them.
All right.
I don't know if that's going to be me. I think it should be me technically because it's the last Senate, so it should be me. So probably Wednesday night. These will be effective.
Would my new organization, would we be okay for funding next semester, or will we be subjected to the 15 academically eligibility?
Yeah, you're going to be subject to 15 weeks. When did you start the group?
About 7 weeks ago.
Yeah, so about halfway, maybe a third of the way through next semester you can apply.
But that's not to say you can't start the process. So that this is the dispersal of funds. So if you want,
no. The policy reads technically that you may apply for funding for 15 academic weeks. Okay. So you can start the process of collecting information. You just have to hit submit.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then you're going to get that money 6 weeks after that, because we have that 6-week deadline. But you may apply. Yeah. So just to clarify that. Yeah. Any other questions on these non-financial changes? Okay. Does anyone else, was anyone not here going this? I went over this at the beginning. I can go over it really quickly again, just for anybody. When we looked at cuts, we didn't want to just cut funding board. Like I said before, funding board is about 2/3 of our total budget per year. The other 1/3 is a mix of variable and fixed costs. Fixed costs are really hard to cut because that means firing people, that means getting rid of contracts that you need in order to function as an organization. So that's really tough to cut. So less than 1/2 of the 1/3 of our budget remaining after funding board is variable and easy to cut. So these are some of the cuts I suggest. I have no power to do this. This is what I'm suggesting for the next year's comptroller. These two lines right here are fixed costs, professional wages and student wages. We have a special payroll employee who works 35 hours a week at $20 an hour. He is going to a new company. We're going to rehire that. My suggestion is we rehire that position at $15 an hour, which is what his original starting pay was. That saves $8,700. Student wages, we have a ton of seniors graduating who work for us, who make just over $10 an hour. We also have some students who are going to be on our executive board next year who are currently working, won't be eligible to work. And we also have some other students who work for us that won't be working for USG for whatever reason. If we take those positions and get rid of them, we don't rehire, that means a few things. One, we save $16,250 roughly, but it also means the SOC is only going to be staffed by one person at a time. The SOC is likely to close earlier in the day on Friday at 5 o'clock. No one comes into the SOC after 5 o'clock anyway. And some other changes in terms of minute taker schedules and things like that, things that just are kind of USG related. But that's $25,000. That's as much as I can squeeze out of fixed costs. So the rest of this is variable costs, the USG non-funding board variable costs, things that are pretty easy to cut. Committee dinners, like I said, we're eligible for $10 a person 3 times a semester per committee. That comes out to $6,300 worth of catering just for USG. If we get rid of that, no more committee dinners. Every meeting is no food. We save $6,300. I think that's well worth it. No more spring, fall banquet. Our banquets are used as our compensation. We don't currently get paid for any of the work we do, so our banquets are counted as compensation. That's how SABO justifies signing off on them. If we get rid of our fall banquet, we save $6,000. If we cap our banquet, our spring banquet at $7,000, we save $3,000. I want people to, so USG is taking sacrifices here too. These 2 events are the most fun things we do all year. We work our ass off all year. It's a lot of fun. We have a lot of dancing on the dance floor. We just had ours last week. It's a lot of fun, a little embarrassing. But you know what? If we're going to cut groups, we have to have less fun. No more fall banquet and a cheaper, maybe on campus, no transportation, less food, whatever. We got to keep it at $7,000. I think that's fair. We can't really have a banquet with anything less than that. And really, it's our only compensation for all of our work. I put in 40 hours a week. Rich is putting in 30 hours a week. Irma's putting in 25 hours a week. Our senators are putting in 10 hours a week. So that's why we want to keep our spring banquet, but just $7,000. We brought 134 people or something to our last banquet, and that's not that much per person. And then the remaining $23,500 is what gets us to $250,000. This is anything from our external affairs movie nights. We have 2 movie nights a year that cost about $1,500. There's $3,000 right there. We have Let Them Eat Cake, which is we budgeted $7,000 for that. It only serves about 100 people in terms of cake decorating and who gets to participate. If we cut that out, that saves $7,000 right there. If we get rid of, or we only do T-shirts at Student Appreciation Day, that probably saves a few $1,000s as well. If we get rid of our care packages for finals, which include a drawstring bag, some pencils, pens, sticky notes, tissues, if we get rid of that, we save $10,000. That's how we get to $63,800, which then gets us to $250,000. So these are USG's cuts. And again, we're taking about proportional to the same amount of cuts as funding board is, based on our fixed costs. It's a little tough to explain, but if you take fixed costs out and you just cut this, non-funding board variable costs and funding board variable costs are being cut about proportionally, so that everyone's kind of being hit equally. And also, we just have less to cut from, just because more than half of our non-funding board budget is fixed costs. We can't afford to fire our bookkeepers. Nothing would get done, and everything would be late. So, does anybody have questions about the cuts that I have? These aren't set in stone. These are what I'm suggesting to Sia and Irma and Lisette for next year, that these kinds of cuts be made, that USG has to make a sacrifice in order to justify making clubs spend more out of pocket as well. And something about spring banquet, maybe that means that the amount that each person pays. This semester we paid $15 out of pocket for spring banquet. Maybe that goes up more. Maybe we ask non-USG guests who haven't done any more for USG, so they shouldn't be being compensated. They pay full price. So that'll save even more money. So that's not really up to me. This is what I have suggested be combined with non-funding board, funding board cuts for next year. That USG must make sacrifice in order to justify the funding board cuts. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about this?
And after we look at funding policies, like Rich and I will be working on internal policies and seeing where we can cut even more. So we will be taking these cuts. Just right now, funding policies, that was our priority.
It's 2/3 of our budget, so. Does anybody else have any questions, comments, concerns? If anybody wants to talk to me or Rich afterwards or send us an email, please do so. I'll be hanging out here, so if you have any personal questions or, I wasn't clear enough or something, Rich and I will be here. Jay and Sia, I don't know what you're doing, but they're the next year's people. Irma is the president next year. She's in the back, so if you want to talk to her, she's going to have more control over this kind of stuff, not so much the funding board changes that we're proposing this year.
I will say, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question. If we're changing over officers, are these new funding policies going to be explained in those training things, or is it too late?
They've been
the
funding board training.
Yeah, so
we're switching over our exec board right now. Are all these policies going into effect?
Every presentation after Wednesday will have these changes, so no one will be lost. We've had a few presentations about funding policies already.
Okay.
Those people will have to be sent a new slide and kind of explain. It hasn't been that many, but there has been a few groups that have already gone through training. But Darren, our person that does the training, has mentioned, oh hey, this may change. Oh hey, this may change. Just, this is in the works. Be aware that, some changes are
I just
coming.
wanted to double check before signing.
We want to make sure that every CFO and every COO knows what's going on.
Yeah, and that's something that they'll definitely take into account as well when they're reviewing the reports.
Any other comments?
Yeah.
All right.
Last thing I will say is that we both really appreciate feedback. I've gotten some stuff that I definitely will be talking to Irma and Lisa and Sia about. But thank you for staying, because I know once people's own portion of the presentation is done, they up and leave.
Yeah.
So we do really appreciate it. This is not how Dim and I wanted to live out the last few days of our terms.
But I'm sure it's not how you wanted to do it either. So yeah, we appreciate you guys coming, spending time, listening to us. I think all of you understand where we're coming from, and that's what we appreciate the most, that you're not yelling and screaming at us saying you don't understand anything. It sucks, and I'm really, really sorry to everybody in this room and to all 600 and whatever groups that get funding or are eligible for funding. I really do apologize that this is the situation we've been put in, but until we can raise our fee, we got to get through this together. So I appreciate you guys giving suggestions to us. We'll maybe rework this a little bit, or if we can't rework this a little bit, say to Sia and Irma, these were the suggestions that were made to us. How can you get those done next year? So I really, really appreciate you all coming here. Thank you so much for spending 2.5 hours with us. We're not the most fun people. Well, we are, we're just not with you. But please feel free to come talk to us after, and thank you all for coming. Thanks, guys. Yeah. Thanks.